Hey everybody, welcome to My Hero Academia, or as we call it on this channel, My Simp Academia, where we simp about Hero Academia responsibly. This is chapter 357, and this chapter, well, this was kind of a big chapter, like, if true, the things that are happening here, if they are actually correct, and not him, kinda, what's the word now, red herring, like cliffhanger, leading us astray. If it's him being honest with the final bits here, this might be a big if true kind of chapter. There's a lot of things happening here. As you recall last time, I was thinking that the fight was not over. I thought that there was going to be something that lengthened the fight or kept the fight going. I thought that All For One would be delaying the inevitable. And mind you, in a way, he still kind of is here. But you know, last chapter I floated the idea of like, oh yeah, maybe he just like covers himself in a cocoon or something that just delays him ultimately being beaten or something like that. I was thinking that we would get an expander like that. What we got in this chapter, it is ultimately an expander, but I do think it has severe narrative implications. I think this is a whole other level. I think it's too much, as commenter White Despair and I already talked about. But when it comes down to it, you know, was this surprising in terms of the Eri being brought up again? Yes, very surprising, extremely surprising. Is that good? Yes, it is really good because I didn't see this coming. Is it a reasonable surprise? Well, that is what the author kind of has to do. He kind of has to justify, okay, this is why it could work. And honestly, when it comes to Eri is so ill-defined and her power is so ill-defined that he has a lot of wiggle room. So as long as he has something coherent, it'll work. The reality is with quirks are a lot more malleable and a lot more modifiable than people actively acknowledge. Like the Doctor ultimately was able to make a Twice copy, even though Twice still had his quirk, and he did it within 3 months. Quirks definitely are something that are more easily manipulated by outside forces. So when it comes to the Eri situation specifically, Overhaul was able to synthesize a version of that bullet that no longer needed Eri. And that's just because he was a hardcore chemist. So when it comes down to this whole All For One thing, if Eri is actually truly involved, if the author even comes in and says something like he used forced quirk activation on a substance within the bullet and activated it on himself, even that by itself would be a justifiable reason. Although we'll talk more about this because like the situation with All For One, I think, needs to be a little bit more controlled just because it is such a big issue here if this goes through and it has no limitations on it. The way he speaks makes it sound like there is a severe drawback to this, but he doesn't know what he's doing. Like, he hasn't tested this. So we're going into unknown territory here, but there's a lot of little tricks that are also happening here with the whole situation that we'll talk about. Ultimately, the chapter gave me a lot of what I wanted. Well, actually, you know, when it came to the expanding of the fight, or like, you know, making sure that All For One continued, it gave me more. And when it came to the Endeavor versus All For One fight, it gave me a little less, but I'm still kind of, you know, it was still kind of what I wanted. Now, let me just think, because there are a lot of general notes, and I'm just trying to think about how exactly to tackle it. Eri is the more interesting part. We'll just start with Eri. So the thing here with Eri that I found really interesting is that the author is repeating something he did during the Shigaraki fight, and I've already drawn up the pages here for you. If you remember, in chapter 281 of Hero Academia, there was this big moment where Shigaraki's like, those fools still don't know that I've got this, and he was referring to the bullet. And ultimately, what I'm bringing up here is that the technique specifically of a villain talking about something that's going to change the battle or change the flow of the battle, and then juxtaposing Eri onto that image. He's done it before. We're seeing it here again. Yet again, Eri is the tool by which a villain gains a momentum shift. He's now, you know, how much of a repeat is going to happen here, it's hard to say. Now, I personally think that if Eri has been brought up on the villain side, I think it would be okay to use her on the hero side. Eri's like super overpowered, but like if the author comes in here and has her rewind a bunch of people, I really wouldn't care less. I think that would just be appropriate, just even the playing field. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think if she finds out that her power was in some way used to make things worse, I think that's even more justified. I really hope no one's moralizing about why we shouldn't be using Eri as a weapon in terms of Hero Academia, because this is not a time for morals when it comes to using a child to help people. Now, what I want to point out, like back with 281, the author, he wasn't 100% set on making Eri this harbinger of doom. Because what happens after the whole segment where Shigaraki uses the bullet, you have to remember, like, the bullet ultimately did not help Shigaraki when it came to Aizawa. So you have a situation here with All For One where the bullet may not help All For One too much. But what I would be looking at is, given that very quickly after, like 10 chapters later, Eri's power comes back in the form of Meteor, and that's a positive thing. We might again see Eri coming back as a positive thing. I don't think the author is going to let Eri be a negative note here. So I would say later on she'll come back in a positive way. More stuff about Eri. The thing happening here, I'm personally very excited about, because I would love to see just how things work when it comes to One For All and Eri's power in particular. A commenter, Kayla, when we were looking at this on the spoilers, she made a really good point. That, this can't be regen because we're getting back new parts. And that just further confirms that it's Eri. And I think another commenter, Miguel, made a point that Eri's quirk doesn't seem to affect her. So when you look at All For One and he's got back his eye and he's getting back his ear, the note to take away there is that unless that quirk was modified, All For One maybe doesn't have the quirk inside of his body. And that's why I have the idea of like forced quirk activation. Just because, yeah, Eri's rewind doesn't affect her. We've seen this hundreds of times, or not hundreds of times, but like every time that Eri used it, we've seen it. So that's worth keeping in mind. Now, I think because this is so insane that we do definitely need the next chapter to open with one of Horikoshi's flashback explanations. The question is it going to be an All For One flashback, or are we going to do it Garaki style? And Garaki style in this case is another character is the one that's explaining the situation. Because if that's the case, then Overhaul will be the one who's sitting in a cell saying like, oh yeah, Eddie's this like actually a big deal kind of thing. Or like, I did something to the bullets to make sure, I could suspend her quirk factor indefinitely within the bulletless substance or something like that, make it permanent. So I really do hope we get the flashback, because this is one of those chapters where you definitely need it. Come on, Horikoshi, do your style. We all know you like doing it. So hopefully we'll get that there. Now, again, more notes from this last segment here. And the reason that I think this is too much, and now we're going to talk about narrative force and like narrative build-up here. So what's happened here is, or let's frame this in the context of what I was thinking before this. Like, even if you look at last week's chapter review, my thought was that it is strange to have All For One be done before the spinner fight is done. That just makes no sense. We're in a situation where it looks like potentially we're going to observe something where the All For One fight is not done until after Spinner and Toga are done. Now, the issue here, though, is that All For One comes back a little bit too strong. This plot twist is a little bit too much. The narrative force on this is like at I won't say 100. You know what? For ease, we'll just put it at 100. All right. So let's like a high 100, right? The issue here is that we are now transitioning away because we have the Izuku shot, and like the author further builds up that this is a big deal by having Yoichi react to the fact that something's changing in All For One. If we were to go right now to the spinner fight and we were to build up from the ground up to the climax on the spinner fight, that would be a terrible move. It wouldn't make sense. You'd be going down from 100, you'd be going down to like a 10, and then you'd be building up slightly back to a 50, because like Spinner's never going to hit 100 unless he gets Kurogiri out of there. So in just terms of the excitement hype level, it's too much of a lull. Just thinking about it from the sense of, doing a weekly manga. Now, mind you, authors and editors can just say, screw it, we can do whatever we want, and they could do it. But the thing is, Horikoshi doesn't do that. Horikoshi is 100% a hype-chasing monster. He chases excitement. That's why the final act is the way it is. There's not really that many slow moments. Slow moments are pretty much dedicated or pretty much constrained into the beginning pages of a chapter, where he's using the chapter break to quickly explain stuff that he didn't cover because he didn't want to be slowed down. Yeah, no, the entire final act is not slow and steady. So there's no reason to believe he's going to actually slow down, especially not on Spinner, who's already an unpopular character, and Shoji, who he doesn't know how to actually use, and he keeps promising us little things here and there. So what I think will probably happen, considering the nature of Shonen Jump, is that All for One in this chapter brings up villains are also scariest when wounded. So I talked about this on the stream, but we will label this point scary villain point. What we might end up seeing is that the author might keep up the momentum, and since this is now signaling All for One's like scary strike back, it might signal that everyone else is about to have their scary strike back. So the thing here is, with scary villain point, right now Dobby is already qualifying for scary villain point. Last time we left him, he was at wounded point. So when we go back to Dobby, we might already see him a little bit past scary villain point, where he's like striking back really, really hard. We don't know the mechanism by which he'll do that, but it's likely that'll happen. When we go to Spinner, instead of having the fight have a logical progression from beginning to end, we might have Spinner already kind of with his back against the wall, and then he hits scary villain point where he gets desperate as well. With Toga, it's also a little bit awkward with Toga, in all honesty, because like Toga was kind of already going to use like twice his quirk. It'd be awkward to just go there and she hasn't used the quirk yet. But you know, like White Despair commenter pointed out that All for One and Endeavor just seemed to be standing in thin air while the whole Shoto versus Dobby fight was going on. So maybe the author doesn't really care about like how this looks. Anyway, when we go to Toga might also be around scary villain point. The thing is, like, we might be very close to scary villain point on every other fight if we go to them right now. So we won't be doing just the build up and like reaching natural climaxes. We'll just start at a natural climax. So for Spinner, you might see him like start lashing out like really hardcore. Maybe show that the fight is about to go a little bit sideways for Shoji and the rest, and that someone's getting into the hospital. And then for the other places like Kirishima and Mina and that kind of stuff, yeah, they'd have to be getting overwhelmed right now. Like, the thing is, like, with All for One signaling this kind of return, it might just signal that everything is about to go a little bit shitty for the heroes, just to keep the momentum up. It'll be interesting to see what the author wants to do, because he could also do anticlimax. But it's just All for One. All for One's style here is a bit too strong. What would be surprising is if All for One ends himself next chapter, but at this point I don't think it's very likely. I think we're gonna transition to the other fights, because those fights need to be done, because they're going to be very unpopular in terms of general excitement, because like Spinner isn't that compelling. Now, one thing I am thinking here though is that for Plan B to happen, like things have to go bad. I do think Spinner's ultimately going to get Kurogiri, and if he doesn't get Kurogiri, like for whatever reason, All for One will have some kind of quirk that lets him teleport or something. I think villain regroup's likely going to happen, because villain regroup's the only way you get to actually utilize Kurogiri, and you get All for One and Shigaraki to look at each other one more time. Alright, next thing to talk about is All for One and what exactly is going to happen here. I gotta mention White Despair again, and I'm just mentioning him so much because we had really good conversations. He brought up the idea that maybe there's going to be a time limit here on All for One, and I think that would actually be a very good thing to do, because like you gotta be really careful here. You don't want to take too much away from Endeavor. You want to give Endeavor like a reasonable victory, and like honestly, he incinerated All for One. All for One's winning because he's cheating. But yeah, with All for One, it would be very reasonable to say like All for One can't control Eddie's quirk. He activated it, but he doesn't know what's going to happen. He's calling this a big sacrificial moment as well. So maybe there is a natural time limit, like Rewind's ultimately going to take him into non-existence, like within 20 minutes. But that would be really cool, because it'd be like, okay, the heroes just have to survive 20 minutes. That'd be a very cool dynamic. That'd be very fun to do, because then it turns it from just being a fight to the death to like, oh god, we have to just survive a natural disaster. There are other questions, like we don't really know what's going to happen with the quirks. Like if All for One gets rewinded, does he go back to prime All for One with all the quirks he had at that period in time? Because like, what about those quirks? Can Eddie affect something that's not there in the body, or that he has no genetic information about? Or are quirks considered, or sorry, is Prime All for One considered a state, and is Eddie ultimately rewinding a state? Because quirks and quirk factors are technically foreign elements, that's like where I'm very just curious. And I think this is going to be really good for the one for all for one, and rewind power logic. I really hope that the author fleshes it out. But yeah, no, there's a lot of ways this could go really terribly. If All for One comes back and he has all of his current or all of his previous quirks, it might be an interesting little thing to see. I know people are also excited about seeing All for One's face. I think like the author's going to hold on, like he's going to hold that off for a little bit. But I do think we're going to get to see his face at some point. I don't know if Endeavor will get to see it. On Endeavor's side, Endeavor still hasn't uttered the words plus ultra. So until he utters the words plus ultra out loud, I don't think this is done. So we're probably going to get more with Endeavor where he finally says plus ultra out loud. He means it. He doesn't make a comment about that you know, that silly school motto or whatever. Anyway, very interested to see what exactly the logic's going to be on what quirks All for One comes back with, and I do want to see the limitation that's going to be placed on All for One. If All for One doesn't get a limitation, then he got really, really lucky. I would really not enjoy that. Since I'm looking at page 14 and 15, there's also the thing here with Izuku sees something in the distance. We counted it. This number is consistent with the amount of jets that there were with Star and Stripe. So I'm kind of hoping it's the jets. I'm hoping it's a positive thing here and not something negative. Yeah, it might be villains, but I don't know how they would find Izuku when All for One isn't like going at it. Also, All for One, if he gets rewinded, he might lose all of these little quirks that he has right now, like all of his superhuman senses quirks or whatever he calls them. We'll have to see. All right, that is the general notes. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let's get into page-by-page walkthrough. And also, by the way, for anyone that's going to be watching the live stream, it might start a little bit late because I have work today. So just letting you know. All right, page 1. Page 1, like, made me happy because this was kind of the thing I wanted to see. Specifically the part where he's like, the likes of you would make me relive the pain and misery of that day. Yes, I really hoped that we would be seeing the second coming of All Might in Endeavor here. The thing here, I mentioned that I was kind of let down, is that it didn't go far enough in terms of this guy pooping his pants in front of Endeavor. Didn't go far enough. I appreciate it because this is what I was hoping for ever since like this whole thing with Endeavor versus All for One started, that he would relive All Might. But it's not scary enough yet. I need this guy to, like, whenever he closes his non-existent eyes, to think like, oh god, Endeavor's flames are burning me. But you know what? He might end up like that later on. Well, you know, gonna give him my time. Okay, the good thing about this chapter 2 is that, you know, some pages are not that important. So like page 2, super awesome. It's cool to see him breathing out. I think this is the most fire I've ever seen from Endeavor ever. So I really hope that when he's breathing fire, it's like he's trying to cool his body down, because that'd be pretty cool. Anyway, we get to see more of him using his missing arm, pretty much. The flame punch looked really good. Page 3 shows us some great Endeavor Hawks team up stuff. So I really liked it. I really liked the look of terror in All for One's face when Endeavor just gets up close to him all of a sudden. So much for superhuman senses. Didn't see that coming. Page 4 was interesting just because of the way that it was drawn. So Endeavor, he like his hand went up and then it like came back down in terms of the fire. Looked really cool once you understood what was going on, but it was a little bit hard for my eyes to figure out what was happening there. Okay, page 5 is a page that is just there just to say that Endeavor is being strategic here. Specifically, he didn't use Prominence Burn because he's still not sure about the defenses the guy has. I thought that was reasonable enough. We find out that Endeavor is still super angry, which you can kind of see in the later pages. But yeah, good stuff there. We move on to page 6, where we see All for One doing his best trying to defend against Endeavor. Actually, did he... Okay, I'm just looking to make sure I didn't miss any little details here. Anyway, we have that great shot where Kamui Woods realizes that Endeavor can actually burn him, so he's trying to get people away. What I liked here is that a bunch of villains get hit in that attack, which I really appreciate. But good for Kamui Woods for being able to run. Now, given that the heroes are all there, like, if things do go bad, the heroes could probably help Endeavor out for a little bit. Like, they could all just kind of team up to try and deal with the monster that is All For One. I don't think that would be too bad. Page 7 is a great page because you get to see this one shot right here of All For One cowering like the coward he is. It just looked really good. You see it when he breaks through. So much for like damage reflection or whatever he calls it. You have Endeavor like really having a good time here. Yeah, no, like ultimately, anytime that All For One does this, this is his I'm really scared thing. I think he even did this. I think he did this against Star and Stripe when it was his Vestige too. So just really good to see the fear in him. Now, page 8. Endeavor takes All For One for a ride. All For One's very lucky that he's durable. Like, Endeavor says he's not durable, but like, being taken through a forest, dragged across hard ground, so much so that trees are getting ripped up, and the guy is not a mess. Like, I don't know, I just watched The Boys, and the guy that got that treatment did not survive it. But like, you know, you want to say that the guy's not durable? A normal person doesn't survive being dragged across mountain soil like that. So props to All For One for having a hard head, I guess. Anyway, All For One finally gets the great idea to try and steal the quirk. Like, thank God. But then Endeavor shows off that he has laser vision now, or like heat vision. I guess it's fire vision. Pretty extreme. This was one of those big surprises. Just because like you wouldn't think, oh yeah, can he release fire from his eyes? But like when you think about it, he can release fire from anywhere. Like, he has a flaming beard. So fire can come out of any part of his body. So yeah, I guess so. I guess eyes does count. Yeah, no, it was a really cool visual. I hope we get to see more of it. It also might have come out of his tear ducts, like thinking about it. Nah, it kind of looks like it came out fully out of his pupils. Anyway, it doesn't matter. All For One and Endeavor have this little moment where, you know, they're talking about the hands that ruin the future, and Endeavor also ruins the future. Or sorry, he also ruins people's futures. I like that they talked about it. I like that Endeavor kind of accepts it. When Endeavor says that All For One is right, you also see his pupils are back, so you don't see like the angry version of him. So that just shows like a moment of lucidity. So ultimately, what happens here is that this conversation ties back into his like the theme that he has with All Might. So at the bottom of page 9, you have him starting his little inner monologue. The past never dies, but the people in it definitely do. You have him like talking about the feelings, and then you have a page that made a lot of people really excited because it shows a glimpse of the future. The thing is though, like this is not All For One, sorry. This is Endeavor talking about it. Maybe these are future designs, but maybe they're not. That'd be neat. Anyway, the big thing of page 11 is that this is a continuation of the All Might and Endeavor talk, and you even have a shot of Shoto from that arc where the talk happened. The future is for a path for the young, a path with so many branching choices. That's why I must win this, so that when those kids walk that path, my past won't stand in their way. Fair enough. It's just like this is just a really basic do it for the next generation type thing. You know, Shonen Jump has that kind of theme. Naruto had that kind of theme. It's all about the next generation. So he just wants to pave the way, make life easier for them. Yeah, that's totally fine. That makes sense. That makes sense with what All Might and him talked about. It's all good. Now, the next little thing you have him saying is that he wants to win and keep his eyes on Toya. I do think Endeavor is going to survive. I think he's going to survive all the way to see Dobby again. Like, if Horikoshi goes in and kills Endeavor through All For One, that would be very surprising. But that would be appreciated if he wants to do that and he can pull it off. And keep Hero Academia going without one of its like major players there, sure. Anyway, the little thing about the future, that was just good because that ties into Endeavor's talk with All Might really well. Page 11 is pretty much Prominence Burn, and he continues the theme of raging against himself. His enemy is ultimately his weakness. Good enough. We go into pages 12 and 13. Here we see the after effects. Now, the thing I'm most curious about is what exactly did Hawks see at that moment to tell him to get away from him? Like, that's just my big question. What did he see? Because I'm not seeing anything special. Did he see like the ear pop off? And that's why it was like, oh my god, he's growing an ear. That's actually very terrifying. And it's like, yeah, it is. I wonder. Anyway, page 13 is just really good stuff, where he's talking about like he wouldn't go here empty-handed. It's good to know that in his idea, where he was, thing is like, All For One plans for failure. So I do believe him when he thinks like, yeah, Izuku might get away from me, but just in case, or in case Izuku pummels me way too hard, I'll make sure to have this little drug. The last bit of page 13 is the most interesting thing, that being this body already served its purpose. Was this sin for the scrap heap anyway, so why not try this? Like, this line right there tells me that he's thinking, yeah, my body's done, but it's okay because I'm gonna live on in Shigaraki, is what he's thinking. He wants to be the Demon King, so I'm really thinking that All For One thinks that he's achieved continuity of consciousness even after death. So it's actually really interesting. There is a very nice level of ego death here, but it's also very egotistical too, because he's still assuming he's gonna survive in Shigaraki's body. So it's just interesting. This is an interesting dynamic to have for the villain, where he can say that, yeah, I'm okay with dying because I know I'm going to survive later, even though, like, a vestige, right now, we don't know if a vestige is actually the person or a copy of the person. We know that there's a transmission of information at the end there, or there's a natural transmission of information, but it's just very interesting. This is something that just ultimately tells me that All For One thinks he's going to get to have majority say in Shigaraki, because he's not going to want to stay in the background. Anyway, we go into the villains are scariest when wounded, and he says that heroes don't have a monopoly on sacrificial moments. So the whole conversation, just with like scrap heap, served its purpose, sacrificial moments, again reinforces the idea that he's not exactly sure what's going to happen here. The reason that's important is because, like, you want to justify why he hasn't done this before. He didn't do it before because he wasn't sure what was going to happen. So he didn't want to take too many unnecessary risks, but given that he's about to die anyway, might as well see what happens. Anyway, page 15, you have Yoichi freaking out about it. So whatever's going on here is strengthening All For One, which might turn into something kind of neat here. Anyway, with All For One doing this, we are now at scary villain point. Big sacrificial moment point. We might be seeing a lot of desperation from the villains now, and that desperation might make them scary, much like a cornered animal about to bite you because you're messing with it way too much. There was one more point. I think Jason Thomas brought this up, but like another mechanism going on here might be something related to the Shigaraki hand villain stuff. Like maybe All For One also overcame singularity, or maybe like Eddie's power is part of the reason why Shigaraki is able to produce so much monsters, not monsters, so much hands. But we'll have to see there. Just wanted to like shout out that one as well. That's it for me. I don't really have anything else to say for the situation. Yeah. Overall, I think really interesting Hero Academia chapter. I am very excited to see what happens next. Guys, let me know what you thought about it down below. And until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.